Can God's Not Dead and God We Trust find its place within the rest of the franchise? Welcome to Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of God's Not Dead and God We Trust. Is it good, is it bad, or is it somewhere right in the middle? Or if you're trying to watch this video, figure out if it's worth your time going into, make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already, to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. But going right into the synopsis, when Reverend David Hill is in a point of turmoil and joins the congressional race as he figures out where God fits within politics, he faces off Peter Kane, who wants nothing with religion to be within the state of the race. And so Reverend David Hill must figure out and get his values and faith put to the ultimate test. And getting right into positive, for the most part, I would say this is a pretty well-made film, and for what we get from director Vance Knoll, who has also done the fourth film in this franchise, he does the job pretty well. The cinematography, the flow of the story is pretty naturally done. The camera work looks good, and for what we get out of the characters, it's a little bit more focus of a story. Maybe not the most focus of the franchise, but it falls along mostly focusing on David Hill, having a couple different subplots here and there, but it still manages to tackle the flow of the story, focusing in on the politics and the ideas at hand, facing upon Peter Kane, and how we establish the characters along the way, certain ideas of trickery, things that go about asking the questions of how God fits within politics, where you're supposed to approach the ideas and values of political races, and also where that takes the consequences of whether a Christian or someone of the faith can fit in within the Congress, and where that puts the votes to begin with, and how that ultimately lead to positive consequences of where we're going within this world that can, in some sense, be what we're facing today, or facing within the future, where we're getting our rights taken away of, and people are just trying to get a rise to power within the government, and certain ideas that just go about in a nice fashion, building upon some decent characters that work within the ideas that you're sort of building upon within the God's Not Dead franchise. It tells its message decently with what we're getting out of it, and it has a specific message about those that aren't voting and putting their votes in, where it really can matter at the end of the day. And getting right into mixed elements, this is a political film. It goes into all these different details of ideas and things that it has to inform you of in order to feel natural. So it isn't necessarily the most appealing. It doesn't necessarily have a court case that it builds the tension high, and so there's some things that can be a drawback that doesn't necessarily break the film for its quality, but certain ideas, certain factors can be a downforce for what may draw you in, even if you're a Christian that's well fit for conservative Christian films like this. It may not always work for you just because of the subject, things that you're not necessarily looking to be entertained by with this film, even if the message you're already on board with. And where this franchise is going as a whole, it's a little bit of a mess where we're getting the characters, because this franchise began with Josh as the main character, and now we're getting David as someone that is once a side character that is connected to the comedic relief. And so there's just a few things along the way that get a little messy, but aren't necessarily a make or break for whether you should or should not watch this film. It's a faith-based film that's conservative, and most people should be knowing what they're getting into already, but it still isn't something that will work exactly the way you want it, because there's just a way about its characters that doesn't formally feel well and real to the aspects of the ideas, but it still feels progressively good to the natural things that I expect out of this franchise, being more conservative and not necessarily trying to take too many heavy-handed risks for what you end up with for this style of film. Which leads me into the negatives, to which I have to say there's certain aspects with its characters that just does not go full force, and something that you have to question the roles of certain characters, whether that's because it's not informing you, if you're not into politics as much, what these roles are like. And so it sort of has to feed you some information along the way, and sometimes it doesn't give too much detail, which can blindside people that aren't as familiar with that, or build up certain ideas or details that you should be figuring out more along the story. And so when you're sort of getting both sides of whether you know it or whether you don't know those details, it can either be overcrowded with information or undercrowded with what you need to know for those that need to know more details of the story. And so just the way the progression goes, there's certain camera shots or flow to the story that can be a little bit interrupted by the natural ideas that it's trying to inform you of the details and what the message is instructing you. It sort of is a message that is a few sentences long, and you're taking a whole film to tell the story, which still puts it out there properly and does a decent job telling a story. But that's still to be said. It feels like the message is the main highlight of this story, because when they have certain characters or a certain aspect to the story that feels watered down or drawn out just because of the way it's safe with what it's trying to do with the story, not having too much strong words or too much that's feeling all too real to the ideas of having to question, does that look right? Does this feel like it flows right? Or have the proper roles that you just question things along the way, and maybe you may not be questioning things at all, but it still has that sense of lack of reality or rose-colored glasses over things, where there's a sense of optimism of certain outcomes or how people would react, because it draws a line where it's just completely fuzzy on whether people are atheists, whether people are believers, and how that all works out gets you a sense of belief in the Christian faith, but not necessarily a clear line between how people really act, and the dialogue can feel a little trippy at times, certain ideas, and it brings in some other characters that we've seen before, but there's still just things that go about along the way that isn't the perfect flow. Even if it feels like a well-made film, certain ideas here and there, there's just ways that it goes about telling its story that can trip you up, even if it does relatively work for what I'm expecting out of this film. That's just my personal thoughts on God's Not Dead, In God We Trust, which I have to rate a simply 5 out of 10. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of God's Not Dead, In God We Trust. Is it good? Is it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? Let me know all your thoughts, and if you should be seeing this, or if you would recommend it to others or not. Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already, to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. I'll be ranking the God's Not Dead franchise very soon, so look out for that video. Be sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.